All right, so today we're going to dive into something that I think a lot of our listeners in Hong Kong might find really interesting. We're talking about getting a free U.S. phone number,
Okay.
and we've been looking at this video that basically walks through how to do this using Helium Mobile.
Right.
And I think, what we really want to do today is break it down, like, what are the steps, what are the benefits, what are the potential downsides?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you can figure out if this is even something that you want to try.
Exactly. Give you guys the information so you can assess whether you want to spend the time and effort going through this whole process.
Okay, cool. So first off, like, what is Helium Mobile?
So Helium Mobile, well, it actually started back in 2013 as Helium.
Okay.
And then they changed their name to Nova Labs in 2021.
Oh, interesting.
But the mobile service is still called Helium Mobile.
Okay.
And what they did is in 2022, they launched an MVNO service in the U.S.
Okay.
Now, MVNO stands for Mobile Virtual Network Operator.
Right.
Basically means they use another company's network infrastructure, in this case T-Mobile.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is that they recently introduced this 0 monthly fee plan.
Okay, so free?
Yeah, a free plan. And now it's intended for U.S. residents.
Okay.
But this video that we looked at suggests that there might be ways for people residing in Hong Kong with eSIM-compatible devices to actually register and get this plan.
So just for anyone who might not know, what is an eSIM?
So an eSIM is basically like a digital SIM card that's embedded in your phone.
Okay.
So you don't need a physical SIM card.
Got it.
It's all done electronically.
That makes sense. Okay, so why would someone in Hong Kong want a U.S. phone number? What are the benefits here?
So there are quite a few potential benefits. One of the main ones is that it allows you to create U.S.-based accounts for various services, like Google, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, and so on. And then a more interesting one is that it might actually give you access to U.S.-specific AI features within WhatsApp,
Okay.
like Meta AI and ChatGPT,
Really?
potentially even without needing a VPN.
Wow.
So that's a huge plus. And then also having a U.S. number could help with things like registering for Google Voice,
Okay.
which in turn might enable you to access paid features of Google's Gemini,
Okay.
or use their API if you have a U.S. account. The video also mentioned that the Meta AI has like a web version, but it's apparently not very user-friendly at this point.
Makes sense.
But it's something to look out for. And then another important benefit is that by using voice over Wi-Fi, which is basically like using your Wi-Fi to make calls and send texts,
Right.
you can actually receive U.S. calls and SMS in Hong Kong without any roaming charges.
Okay.
And you can even call the U.S. without paying those expensive IDD charges.
Wow. Okay, so there are some real benefits here. So how do you actually register for this from Hong Kong? Like, what are the steps involved, and what should people watch out for?
So the first step is to visit hellohelium.com.
All right.
Now, you'll probably need an invitation code to sign up.
Okay.
The video mentions one specific code, but these codes often have limited uses.
Right.
So you might have to search around a bit to find a working one. And just to give you an idea of what you get with the free plan, it includes 3 gigabytes of data that you can use in the U.S.,
Okay.
100 minutes of calls, which are also likely for U.S. use,
Right.
and 300 SMS messages.
Right.
Now, for registration, you typically use an existing Apple or Google account,
Okay.
which is quite convenient. But here's where things get a bit tricky.
Okay.
A U.S. address is actually required during the sign-up process.
Right.
The video suggests using a residential address in Delaware
Okay.
that you can find on Google Maps. And more importantly, you have to go through this real name verification process.
Okay, so this isn't anonymous?
No, not at all. You have to upload a copy of your passport and a selfie.
Wow.
And, the good news is that a Hong Kong passport seems to work fine.
Okay.
But, this is something to consider carefully in terms of privacy.
Right. Handing over your information.
Exactly. And then finally, using an eSIM is really the most practical option if you're in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Because getting a physical SIM card would involve setting up U.S. mail forwarding.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, so you've signed up. What about the technical side of things? How do you actually set it up and use it?
So once you're registered, you need to download the Helium Mobile app.
All right.
The video actually shows you what the app icon looks like, so you know what to look for.
Okay.
And then when you set it up, the app will ask for location sharing as a condition for the zero fee plan.
Interesting.
Although the person in the video mentioned that they disabled it afterwards and they haven't had any issues so far.
Okay.
But, that's something to keep in mind. And then to receive U.S. calls and texts in Hong Kong without any roaming charges,
Right.
you'll need to enable voice over Wi-Fi on your phone.
Okay.
They even recommend that you briefly connect to a US VPN when you first turn on voice over Wi-Fi.
Interesting.
But the key thing is to avoid enabling roaming,
Okay.
because that will definitely lead to charges.
Right.
Now, for most people in Hong Kong, the main reason for getting this is probably to register for those U.S. accounts and access AI features,
Right.
not necessarily to make a ton of calls.
Okay, that makes sense. So are there any other important things that people need to keep in mind before trying this out, like any potential downsides or risks?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing is the mandatory real name registration with your passport and a selfie.
Okay.
That's a significant privacy consideration. You're handing over a lot of personal information.
Right.
And then also, the free plan's data and call allowances are primarily for U.S. use.
Okay.
So if you're planning to use this a lot in Hong Kong, you might run into limitations.
Right.
And then just be prepared for the possibility of more scam calls
Right.
with the U.S. number is something to consider. And then finally, the zero-fee plan requires, or at least requests, location sharing.
Right.
And we don't really know how long this free service will last.
Right. Could change at any time.
Exactly. Things could change down the line. They might start charging fees or change the terms of service, so it's not completely risk-free.
Okay, so basically you could potentially get a free U.S. number to access U.S. online services and maybe even some cool AI tools, but you'll need to provide the U.S. address,
Right.
hand off for your personal information.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee they will stay free forever.
Exactly. That's a good summary.
Okay, so what's the takeaway here? What's the final thought for our listeners?
I think the final thought is that while the idea of a free U.S. number and wider access to online platforms is very tempting,
Oh, yeah.
you have to weigh that against the privacy implications.
Right.
You're giving up a lot of personal information and possibly your location data for a service that isn't guaranteed to be free forever.
Right.
So the question is, what's more important to you, the convenience of a U.S. number or your privacy?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's something everyone needs to think about for themselves before jumping in.
Yeah, some food for thought.
Exactly.
Okay, I think that about covers it.
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks for breaking that down.
No problem. Happy to help.
All right, well, that's all for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.